So welcome to one more episode of Real AI Now, brought to you by 2Impulse. My name is Paulo Nunes. I'm the CEO of 2Impulse, and I'm going to be your host today. This episode is going to focus mostly on responsible AI, responsible use of AI. We have a special guest today. His name is Srini Koushik. He's the president of AI and sustainability at Rackspace. Welcome, Srini.
Thanks, Paula. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. So let's start. With all what's been happening the last, let's say, 2 years in the AI space, what is the most surprising use of AI that you have seen in the past year?
That's a great question. It's actually something that I spend a lot of time looking at all of the applications of AI, and I can tell you one of the things that is most surprising, but also is something that's got a very, very good promise, is the use of AI in mental health. Right. So especially in the US, I think we have a shortage of trained counselors, right? You know, with going on in the world, the level of anxiety, the level of loneliness has gone up. So people want to talk to therapists, and we don't have enough trained therapists in the US for sure. And basically, what I've seen is like these apps, these solutions that have come up that use large language models and generative AI actually have a intelligent conversation. So when you are in need of talking to a therapist, to actually have a conversation with someone, and again, with models like GPT-4o, you're able to talk to it. So it's almost like you could put a voice to it. It's, in the remote thing. And I see tremendous potential for that technology. I think it's just amazing that it's one of the best uses I've seen of AI tech in the last year and a half to 2 years.
Okay. Oh, that sounds great. It makes me think though, because we use the term responsible, but it's going to be our main topic of today. And I'm just thinking the problem is there. It exists also in Europe, not just the US. So it might be in the whole world. There's a lack of mental health professionals, and they're also expensive, right? Because they are very highly qualified people. I wonder. I mean, empathy is one of the things that mental health professionals need to kind of have and develop a sort of a relationship with the person that they're working with. Do you think AI is able to fill those shoes?
It's a fascinating thing to go through. I think a big part of it, I've spent part of my career was a CIO at a healthcare company that we focused on mental health and that space. One of the challenges that you have in this space is access to care, right? When you do have episodes, it's important that you talk to someone, right? And having to wait for 3 months to get an appointment or 2 months to get an appointment, it really gets to become too late. So there's multiple situations when it comes to mental health. One is always having someone accessible that you can talk to, right? And be able to have that conversation. The other is when you get into dire situations, right? Like one of the startups that I've invested in focuses on suicide prevention. Right. And that's a dire situation, right? I think empathy is critical there. So you will never, I think the irresponsible use of AI is how do you use AI to increase access to mental health, but at the same time know when to bring a human being in the middle, right? How do you make it safe? How do you actually rely on those characteristics of empathy and listening, right? Like so that you can actually augment it. So you'll always have a shortage of mental health professionals who can kind of, but AI can be that mental health professional that can be there all the time, right? Available at any time you want to. And the other nice thing is with the contextual conversations you can have, it can remember the previous conversations you've had with it. So it's almost a personal mental health professional that is geared
Perfect
just
memory.
to give it is ideal to be able to use it here. obviously the responsible AI component of it is, can we do it in a safe way to human beings, right? Like, you've got to be able
Right.
to do it in a way that is safe. It protects, like, the privacy of individuals and others are very, very critical. So how do you make sure that it can continue to learn like, for example, if I'm using it, how can it learn my characteristics, my behavior, how to converse with me without using my data to train the larger models and other types of things? The protection
Right.
of privacy of information is going to
Right.
be critical. Yeah.
So this is very interesting. I think we could still talk about this for hours. So um clearly there is a gap there, there is a need, and what you said, I completely agree. There is, I mean, if I need to talk to somebody, I need to talk to somebody now, not in 2 weeks, not in a week, not in 2 days. I need now, I need help now.
Yeah.
And an AI will be always there. That's the first
Right.
thing. Second, will remember everything. It has perfect memory,
Yeah.
virtually, and always remembers everything about me. It might even know my history, not just, well, if I share
Yeah.
some information about my life, and I share lots of stuff about my life with the AI, assuming that it's private, that doesn't
Yeah.
leave
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
own realm, and that is my private AI, and the data never leaves. It actually knows a lot about me, something
Yeah.
that probably a therapist or a professional would
Correct.
never do. Would be
Yeah.
very difficult for them to know everything.
Yeah.
They have their notes and they remember conversations, but they have to go through them. But it's not the same, is it?
Yeah, it's not to, and think about this, like, again, I think part of this, the individualized therapist, right?
Yeah.
That same thing applies. Like, one of the fantastic books I read recently
Mhm.
was Brave New World, like, by Salman Khan,
Mhm.
of the Khan Academy fame, right? Like, he's been passionate about education and
Mhm.
bringing up the next. And he talks about how, like, what they've introduced right now is something called Conmigo, right, which is built on top of generative AI. And what it really does is it becomes an individualized tutor to your kids, right? So the challenge you've got with education these days is, a teacher has to teach to the entire class of 30 people,
Yeah.
30 kids, and they have to kind of adjust the speed to the average speed of learning within the class.
Well,
What if,
probably
yeah,
even to the lowest
yeah,
bar.
right. So what if you can actually have an individualized tutor that if a kid is 4 years ahead of where she needs to be, like, it's tutoring them at that level,
Right.
versus somebody that is struggling to understand some of the basic concepts, I can kind of come down to that level. So it's truly no kid left behind, no child left behind, because you can have
Right.
individualized tutors to
Or
do that.
sometimes I might just have a particular gap, for example.
Correct. Yeah. So that's a great point, because when I was growing up, I really did not like. I was very good at science, but I was not good at math. Right. And again, I'm not going to blame that. I did not pick it up as quick as some of the other folks would.
Mhm.
But it took me extra tutors and everything else to kind of get to that. I'm good at math now, but the way I learned was very different. Right?
Mhm.
Again, the advantage of having an individualized tutor is it's
Yeah.
not really going to, like, if Paulo needs to learn a certain way, it's going to teach you that way. And if Srini needs to learn a different way, then it's
Right.
going to get me there. Right. Again, think about this. This is one of the most promising areas of AI. There are so
Mhm.
many places where we've got a shortage of professionals, teachers, mental
Mhm.
health professionals, and others. What if we can have AI to not replace them, but to augment them? You still are
Right.
going to need teachers. You're
And
still
that's
going to need human beings, right? How do
so
you augment them? Yeah,
and that's what I was going to bring up next, right?
yeah,
So augment students, or would be like augment patients, or
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
people who need help, from a mental health perspective. Um, well, but while you were talking, I was thinking, okay, so sometimes you do need to bring a human, because
yeah,
there are situations where the AI will not be enough. There
yeah,
is the need for a human. Now,
yeah,
the human might need help as well from an AI.
Correct.
that professional. So when I'm thinking that I'm talking to my doctor, not even my like my therapist, but by just my
Physician, yeah.
medical doctor, my physician, and I'm telling him something. He's half paying attention to me, the other half is trying to read my file while I'm talking and
Yeah.
and it basically it needs to do it very fast because it doesn't have a lot of time. And so if he had a tool that actually listens to the conversation while we are speaking, the
Yeah.
tool knows everything about me, right? It can give advice to the doctor and say, oh, maybe this, maybe that, try looking
Yeah.
into this, try looking into that, because he had this episode before, he had this issue before. But that would apply to my physician, that would apply to my therapist as well. And this would be also great help. So, you talked about helping patients directly with AI, like an assistant or like augmenting them, helping
Mhm.
them, being there 24/7, but also for the professionals. Does
Yeah,
that make
absolutely.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's see, that is the true potential, right? So let's jump into the topic of responsible AI, right?
Yeah.
So the way we at Rackspace and the FAIR, which is the Foundry for AI by Rackspace, the
Mm-hmm.
way we describe responsible AI is using three words that start with S, right?
Yeah.
The first one is symbiotic, and I will come to each of these. The first
Okay.
S is symbiotic. The
Symbiotic,
second one is it has secure,
secure,
right? And the third one is sustainable, right?
sustainable.
So
Okay.
for AI to be responsible, it first has to be symbiotic with human beings. The definition of symbiotic is it has to coexist, right? When it needs to help you, it helps you.
Mm-hmm.
When it needs to take over and do tasks for you, it needs to do that, but it should always do so in a way that is symbiotic with human beings. From biology, right? People describe symbiosis as two organisms working well together, not both benefiting from one another,
Mm-hmm.
right? Otherwise, it's a parasite, right? That's
Yeah, that's
symbiosis is
parasitism.
all about like organisms. Yeah,
Symbiosis. The symbiosis is a relationship between two living beings that actually not only cooperate but depend on each other.
yeah, they depend and they are actually benefiting each other. So
Yes.
I think responsible AI, when you build it that way, what we've been talking about with mental health professionals or with teachers, or the
Mm-hmm.
example that you
Yeah.
used, physicians, right? If I'm going in for my checkup, I've done all of my blood tests and everything else. The AI can actually analyze it, and when
Mm-hmm.
I walk into the office, it can actually give the physician a lot of information because a physician, if you think about it, at least in the U.S., they're going from patient to patient to
Yeah.
patient. Their
Exactly.
context in their mind is switching from one patient to the other. They may see somebody that's very healthy right now, and then they have to go to something else, right? And it's really
Yeah.
difficult for humans to context switch.
It's
So
really
what if
difficult.
AI, yeah, what if AI can do that groundwork for you? So instead of today in the US, you walk into a doctor's office, they're spending time looking at the charts. They're trying to interpret, oh, last time I gave you this medication, how's that working out? All of those other things.
Yeah.
What if that can be analyzed and you come in and the doctor actually has the context,
It has
right?
a briefing already from
Right.
the
It
AI,
has a
right?
briefing from the AI, right? Again, they can become more focused on the patient and not
Yeah.
reading the chart that's out there, right? And again, that's a symbiotic relationship because
Uh-huh.
as a physician, I've gotten better, right?
Mm.
Because this thing helped me. And as AI, like you're increasing access to care because every doctor,
Mhm.
at least the States is like the healthcare system is really stretched, right? And every 15 minutes, they need to be able to go see another patient because there's that much
Yeah,
demand
it's
in
like,
this thing.
you know,
So how do
I'm
you
in
make them?
Germany. I'm living in
Yeah,
Germany, and it's not very different.
yeah.
And it
So,
depends a bit
so
on what kind of insurance you have. The
correct,
better the
correct.
insurance, the more time they tend to spend with you. But it's just there's a system. There's
there's
just
another
not enough
great,
doctors.
yeah, there's another great thing, right? Like the when you kind of think about it, again, it needs to, so that you talked about insurance and others, right? How many people are prevented from the best care because they don't have it, right? So
Yeah.
clearly the symbiotic piece is one piece, but what you're talking about now gets me to the second component of it, right? The secure piece of it.
Hmm.
for PHI and protecting the privacy of individuals, everything else, whether it's the teacher example I used or the mental health professional, the physician example we've been using, the privacy of data, right? You almost have to have your own individual tutor or individual physician that doesn't share your information with others. And that's important. And the other thing that physicians are geared to do is do no harm, right? Safe. It has to be safe for
Absolutely.
the human being. So I think for responsible AI, you not only have to be symbiotic, you actually have to be secure and safe. And
Secure
that's
and
the
safe.
second component of our responsible AI piece of it. And so that's important.
So one other aspect that just reminded of is, well, we're talking about doctors, but this could apply to any type of people who have jobs where they need to spend time with people. But doctors they not only have to deal with the patients very fast, they need to prepare themselves in a very short period of time for the next conversation, and they don't have time for that, right? So the preparation is a bit clumsy. So it's I have a lot of respect for the doctors that they are able to do this 50 times a day, and so it would be great for them to have this briefing from the AI that helps them, like, and get up to speed. Then after the conversation, they also need to take notes. And sometimes they need to write a report, or they need to write a letter that in order to transfer the patient to the next doctor, for example. So I spoke to a doctor about this last year, and he said that he was a knee specialist in operation in knees, and he said that he spent more time doing paperwork than with patients. So he is a surgeon. He talks with patients. He operates, and he does surgery on patients. But he spends more time doing paperwork than the other stuff. And so AI could help also assist a doctor doing this paperwork.
Right. No, it can. It absolutely can. And it again goes back to the first two things we talked about, right? Doing the paperwork is that symbiotic relationship you talked about. But the safe and secure component of it comes in when the AI also has to be, and we have to put the guidelines and guardrails in place so that it knows when to bring in a human being, right? It really needs to have the controls to say, okay, this is something where I am not 100% sure I got to bring a human being in the middle, right? To be able to do that piece. Because it's always that fine balance you've got to walk to be able to make it a responsible AI, because if you don't do that, again, AI is no different than human beings, right? Everybody says, well, it's hallucinating. It's like, look, most human beings would be very happy if they're right 95, 98% of the time. Well, what we're saying is, like, AI is hallucinating 3 and 4% of the time. It's not, I'm saying it's not acceptable, but it's actually performing at a very, very high level.
It is.
But the question is, when do you need to bring in a human being? And in the case of a physician, it may be more often, right? Meaning, like, because it deals with the health of a patient, I may have to bring in the physician into the loop, a human into the loop more often. Versus in other cases, it can probably do things more in an automated way to be able to do that, right? Which is the third part of it, right? In order for you to get AI to be symbiotic and secure, the third part of it is sustainable, right? For us, and why I come back to sustainable. The sustainable has multiple meanings, but I tend to use the World Economic Forum definition of sustainability, which is number one, in order for something to be sustainable, it has to be environmentally sustainable, right? That's one. Number two, if you're going to do this, it really needs to be done in a way that's equitable to everyone across the globe, right? And then number three, if you're building anything from a sustainability standpoint, you have to think about the future economic sustainability, right? And all of those are tied in hand to hand, because most of the time it's trade-offs. Because if you take a completely green agenda, then you may be cutting off growth and development in places that need to get developed. So it's a trade-off. But AI has to deal with all three of them, because number one, AI consumes a lot of energy. So the types of application that you use AI for is going to be very important, right? You could use AI for trivial things like, hey, generate an image of a monkey playing cards or something like that. And I think that's a very trivial use of AI and a waste
Right.
of energy versus what the examples we're talking about. Can I use AI to coach a kid that's struggling in school so that he or
Right.
she can achieve their full potential? That's a responsible use of AI. The
Okay.
create a monkey playing cards or something like that is not, right? So number one, environmentally picking the applications is important.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, we have to spend an equal amount of time training humans to work with AI as much as we're training AI to work
Mm-hmm.
with humans.
Okay.
Because all the examples we've used so far,
And is
Paulo,
that part of sustainability
yeah,
now?
it is
How is
because
that?
it's part of economic sustainability. Because if
Okay.
AI replaces human jobs,
Right.
then what do human beings do? They don't have an economic viability. So unless you train human beings to take
Right.
advantage of this technology, this is going to be really tough, right?
Disruptive. Huh?
Yeah, it's going to be very disruptive and it won't be sustainable in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody talks about this, and this is very important. How do you make sure that AI doesn't bring in the biases that are there in the underlying data, right? And that's a very, very important component of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the challenges we've had with the tech revolution over the last 20 years is while it's brought a lot of prosperity, it's also increased the income inequality, right? Like the people who are doing well are doing very well, and
Yeah.
then more homeless and everything else going up. So the societal problems have increased
Yeah.
because of the use of technology the wrong way. So I think with AI, unless we watch that, this cannot and this can end up in a very bad place. So
Mm-hmm.
for us, responsible AI and how we help our customers comes back to we want to make sure that we're building AI that's symbiotic with human beings, that is secure and safe for them to be able to use, and something that is sustainable in the long run. That's
Okay.
responsible AI for us.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. The framework, it's the first time I hear the framework put in this way. So can we maybe dig in a bit deeper on the topic of, so you mentioned bias,
Mhm.
for example, topic of bias, that's clearly a part of the topic of responsible AI. Where would you place it in that framework? Is this
The bias would be in the sustainable component of
in
it,
the
right?
sustainable? Okay.
Yeah, if you actually build a solution that is completely biased over a very short period of time, people are going to get disadvantaged. And then
So
you're
it's about
going to have,
equality
yeah,
or
yeah,
equity. Yeah.
it's about
Okay.
equity. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And so how do you do that? For example, so what is how do you, and I assume that you work with customers, companies that or organizations that work with you. How do you help them making sure that, for example, if they are using generative AI, which is it's now the new technology, it also applies to other kinds of AI, other kinds of machine learning models.
Yep. Yep.
But for example, in this new hot topic of generative AI and things like ChatGPT, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
how do you make sure that, for example, that bias is that risk is mitigated?
Yeah. So there are a few ways to absolutely do that, right? I think, first of all, it starts with the values of the company. Every organization you and I have worked with has got values that they've described. Like,
Hmm.
and I think most of the times in the past, what's happened is the values have been there. It's been used to drive the culture of the organization. How do you train people? How do you make
Hmm.
sure you do that? I think it's very important that you take the values and take it through the development of generative AI solutions for your
Okay.
organization, because it's so when you were like, I used to work for a major insurance company here, and we had basically respect for people was a value, right? You can have that on a chart and have it there, but how does respect for people translate into what you're building, what type of language,
Hmm.
type of tone you're going to use, and other types of things?
Hmm.
So clearly something that's there. I told you already that I work for a healthcare company, and one of the challenges that we always dealt with is how do you increase access to care? right? Increasing access to care because you have a shortage of physicians and others. So if I build a generative AI solution that is only accessible to existing
Right.
patients, right? Or people who have insurance, then I've not increased access to care.
Right.
How do I actually start thinking about the solution and who do I deploy it to? And if I'm thinking about a lower income class of people, right? How am I expecting them to have a computer, a web browser, an internet connection, all of those things to be able to access these things? So you've got to be able to start thinking through how do you increase access to the solution. Number one is how do you build the solution, the data you use and the values of the company. But the second is how do you increase access to it so that more people have access to that solution.
But isn't that a given almost already? I mean, let's say you, for example, build an app that is that helps children learn, right? Isn't that much easier to build and to build at least and to price it in a much affordable way than a tutor, for example, would ever be? So in that sense, if you are making education more accessible to people, well, tutors are expensive,
Yeah.
right? So I'm assuming that you could build an app that is cheaper, that is much more affordable than any tutor would be, and
Yeah.
you can still have, it could still be a great help for children or
Yeah.
in education, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but affordability is only one part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, so affordability of the app, which is what you're talking about, which is, look, I can build that application. The minute I put it, the minute I do it with generative AI, and I have it available over the web, it's accessible to everyone who has access to the web. That is absolutely correct. I'm saying, like, for responsible AI and eliminating bias, you have to go one more step beyond that, right? I can tell you that in the US, there are still neighborhoods like and communities that don't have access to decent internet, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
by the way, they're working 2 and 3 jobs to make sure that they are actually able to pay rent and get their food every day. And when you have a situation like that, AI is farthest from their mind. And unless we bring those people along, what's going to happen is the rest of the people are going to get better and better. Those who have access to all of these tutors and individuals are going to keep getting better. And then the people that don't have access to are going to get left behind. And we're
Okay.
going to make income inequality, and we're going to create a world that's two different things, which has more conflict. Right?
Okay.
I think eventually all the conflict in the world gets traced back to resources and not having it and those things. If we're not careful, that's kind of where this can lead to. And I
Okay.
think it needs more people to kind of start thinking about it that way so that 30 years from now, 40 years from now, you have a world that our kids and grandkids want to live in.
Okay. So what other aspects of responsible AI do you see that we haven't talked about yet? For example, one of the so we talked a lot about equality now, making
Yeah,
education,
yeah,
healthcare more accessible to everybody, and that we have to pay attention that there is probably a segment of the population, and this varies from country to country, but there's a segment of the population where access is a problem even to
yeah,
technology itself,
yeah,
and that their jobs are at risk as well, because at least some of their jobs, not
yeah,
all, but some of their jobs are at risk because AI will replace them, will displace these people, some of the people. So um what other aspects are there? You mentioned data privacy, you
yeah,
mentioned briefly PHI, personal health information.
yeah.
But what else do you see? For example, one thing that comes to mind is the topic of transparency, right? So
Mhm.
that one of the issues I see and I read about today is the fact that some of these generative AIs you don't really know with what data they are trained, because
Yeah, yeah,
that's not really public, right? And this to me creates a problem. This to me
yeah,
is not really a responsible use of AI if you don't know how the AI was trained and what data was the AI fed? Do you see also this issue?
I think it's a major issue, and like I think so. So let's talk about transparency, right? And how it fits into the framework that I just talked about.
Yeah.
In order for an AI to be symbiotic with you, right, you have to be able to trust it.
Yeah.
How do I trust it when I don't know when what data it's being used
To train it.
and where is it coming in? So transparency and is a very critical component of responsible AI.
Mhm.
However, I think it also is critical. No, I think one of the things that gets left out in this whole AI discussion is you have providers who are training things using they're building these large language models. You've got multiple providers who build large
Mhm.
language models. Some of them are closed models, from OpenAI, from Anthropic, and all of these guys. It's closed models. And others, like
Open.
Mistral and others are open, they are open models, right? Which are essentially, they're saying you can see what data we're using to train it on and other types of things.
Right.
I think the data that's used to train the large language model is important, and it's only one component of it. Because
Yeah.
when organizations, like any of the applications that I just talked to you about, right? Whether it's the mental health the application or uh, the large language model plays a very important part of this whole thing, but actually the one that makes it more responsible is your data that you're using to train it, and how do you set the parameters so that it responds. It leverages the large language model for the broader purpose, but internally it is fundamentally using your data to train that. So that's a more important component in my mind, and that's where organizations, enterprises have a lot more leading role to play, because using their values, building things that are symbiotic, secure, and sustainable starts
Right.
with the organization. I'm not suggesting that the large language model providers like OpenAI and
Like
others
the
don't have
foundation
any.
models.
Yeah, those foundational models are going to be important. They're going to use the. It's a double-edged sword with the large language models, because they are all so good because they've trained it on the world's information. That's both
Right.
good and bad information they've trained it on. That's
Right.
why it's that good. So now the question is, how do you balance that to make things more symbiotic? So the way I talk to people about it is, um, think of a large language model, whether it's Gemini from Google or OpenAI's the GPT 4.0 from OpenAI. You should think of them like Swiss Army knives, right? It's a very useful tool, but it's meant to do many things. It can kind of create text for you. It can create an
Right.
image for you. It can write but most of the times, the solutions we're talking about, like, again, I'm going to keep going back to that mental health app and others, they're not Swiss Army knives. They're actually very specific tools built for a specific purpose,
Yeah.
right? So paying attention to that and creating AI that is useful to solve specific human problems is going to be the core of responsible AI. And that's kind of what we're helping. And at this stage, I can tell you, I'll just bring in this piece. A year and a half into this Gen AI journey, it's still too expensive for most organizations to create that type of tool. But that's going to change, right? As
Right.
computing continues to evolve, 6 months later, we may not be
Right.
having the same discussion. But it's very important to know that what responsible AI is not about putting a Swiss Army knife in front of people. So look, I have this discussion all the time. I have customers ask me, why can't I buy ChatGPT Enterprise and give it to all of my employees? And my thing is, absolutely you can, right? If that's what you want, if you want a Swiss Army knife to be able to do that, but for something to be, I don't know if you're a outdoor camper or something like that. If you're an experienced outdoor camper and things like that, you can do a lot with Swiss Army knife.
Right.
For someone like me who goes to the outdoors occasionally, right? And you give me a Swiss Army knife, it's not useful, right? Give
Yeah.
me something, a tool that's built for a specific purpose, and I can enjoy the time outside. So I think
Right.
that's a very important distinction we will, as we mature in this space, we're going to get better and better at it, and I see positive things coming out of it.
Right. So I agree with you that that there's a lot of opportunity for companies, for organizations in general, for governments, for organizations in general to use this kind of AI to combine, let's say, take a foundation model trained. I do believe that transparency there is key.
Yep.
So I would not want to use a model that I don't know how was trained. That's
Yep.
one of the that is closed. I don't think that's responsible.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if it was trained with data that was stolen, then I'm using the product of a stolen. But okay, we don't need to talk too long about that. But
Right.
it is many companies claim that their data is being used to train the models without their authorization and are complaining and are suing. Even companies like OpenAI, they say, okay, you can use your our models. If you get sued, we give you legal support. To me, that's not really responsible. That's not really the answer. But again, they're not the only ones, right? Training
Yeah.
models with proprietary data, and so that's one aspect. The second aspect is assuming you can take a model that is where with what data the model was trained, and you know that you can trust that. It's still a foundational model. It's a generic kind of
Yeah.
thing. There's a lot of power to combine that with your own proprietary data in your organization and create something useful and very focused.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that, and I think that's where the bulk of our work is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we need to create a responsible. So it needs to have those aspects, right? It needs to be something useful. It needs to be it needs to be sustainable, and it needs to be safe, right? And
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
combining all those three can be a challenge, isn't it? I mean,
It is a challenge. It is kind of where I think you have to be as an organization or as a government. I love the fact that you use government also on it, right? Like, and that there's a good
yeah.
example, right? Where so our city, I live in a city called New Albany, right? And we have our own zoning codes and everything else that's there, right? So I think, can the city of New Albany use generative AI and apply their principles and their guidelines to give citizens a better experience? They absolutely can. Can they use a large language model? Absolutely, they should, because one of the things I can get from any of the large language models that are out there, the foundational models that are out there, is language translation. So if I need
Right.
to not just give it in English, but in Spanish and in other languages,
Yeah.
a large language model can do that. I don't have to worry about it, right? But it
Right.
is very important that I train my city's enterprise inference, a city's inference, on the right data based on the values of our city, right? And be able to drive that. And I think it's a very like you mentioned,
Right.
government, it's a great use case, right? Like for how we can do that. And if you do
Right.
that, imagine the access that everybody has to those city and government
Exactly.
services. Yeah.
I mean, one of the issues I see here, for example, in Germany, which is where I live, is that there's a lack of resources, lack of people, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult for the government or for the city administration, for whatever public administration, to hire people, to hire, train, and retain people, right? So they are constantly, permanently understaffed, and of course the service suffers because of that. The service that they offer to citizens suffers, and this is obviously a great way of compensating for that, to help people to get access, to help the city make better use of our tax money, the city or the government. So it's a win-win situation.
Right. But
And
there's like I think that's where the whole world will mature very quickly, Paulo, because I think today there's a novelty in the technology and everybody's using it for all of these, like in my mind, wasted purposes, right? Again, can generative AI create these images? Absolutely it can, right? Can it do deep fakes? Yes, it can, right? However, that's the wrong use of AI. The more responsible use is like the types of things that we're talking about, right? Because Every government struggles with taxes, right? If you don't have enough people that you can hire, the only way you get to hire more people is, first of all, you need to have access to the resources, but also you need more revenue to go get that. How do you get revenue? You raise taxes. Nobody loves raising taxes on yourself.
Right.
But what if there's a way for me to increase the access to these city services to a broader population
Without raising costs.
without raising costs, right? Or
Yeah.
at least without constantly raising costs on that front. There are ways to do it, but now you have to kind of focus your resources on doing those things to do that. I think the world will get there. Different countries like Germany and others are always on the forefront. I expect them to get there sooner, but at the same time, I think as
Right.
people start realizing the power of what AI can do for you and
Yeah.
get beyond the initial stuff, that we're going to see some really cool things come out of this.
Yeah. So, I mean, and of course, we are talking from a perspective of US, Europe,
Yeah.
Western Europe, Germany, and so let's call these more industrialized countries.
Nation.
Now, there are lots of countries that are less industrialized, and governments don't even have the resources to provide that service to citizens, and that AI can help them making some of these things accessible to people, because all of a sudden the resources will be there. It will be easier to do it. It just needs to be implemented in a sustainable way, isn't it?
So yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That, like when we were talking earlier about sustainable, and I was talking about a broader definition, it's that,
Yeah.
right? Can we build individualized tutors for kids? Yes, people are already doing it. Can we make it available to those kids in sub-Saharan Africa? Most companies are not going
Right.
to do that because they can't make money off of it. But
Right.
there's going to be some way for us to make that available to people, because if we don't do that,
The gap will increase.
gap will increase, then you're going to have migrations of populations from there to Europe, and you're going to have economic issues, you're going to have social issues, and all of those other things. I think the best way that AI can help the world is to raise all economies, right? But in order to do that, I think the models we've used in the past is not going to work. Meaning, some nations kind of do that, like they just isolate the technology and they keep getting more and more powerful, and and so I do believe that over a period of time this will get equalized, because the nice thing about it is, if I have access to these large language models, people can do better research than others, like across the world. It's already starting to happen, because you start looking at the number of patents coming in and other types of things. It's no longer one or two countries that are dominating it. It's coming from all over the world.
Right.
I think we'll get there, but you have to be able to spend more time really thinking about how do you not leave any population behind, because that will come back and bite us later.
Yeah, you can't just leave that to the free market, can you?
Yeah.
There needs to be some action, needs to be action there. Governments need to act there in order to avoid that those equalities increase.
Yeah.
Inequalities.
The free market is always going to keep driving innovation, right? But I think the free market may or may not think about all of the populations that are left behind, because they're driving innovation. They've got a for-profit motive, and I'm all for free markets. You've got to do that. The innovative engine has to keep going, but we also need to balance it out. Yeah, you need to balance it out.
Need to balance it up, because the free market is also blind.
Yeah,
and it creates inequalities sometimes, right? And this is what we need to avoid, actually, or we need to maybe steer the innovation more to areas where
I keep
it
saying,
reduces inequality while still making profit, because there needs to be an economic motivation too.
Right. One of the benefits of being a human being is you have the potential to learn from your mistakes. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's learn. Let's learn. I think there's a lot of positive things that came from the internet and technology revolution. It's actually made access available to everyone. There's a lot of positives that came through, but let's also acknowledge that there was also negatives that came through. Right. We moved back to Columbus, Ohio about 3 years ago from San Francisco. San Francisco was one of my favorite cities to be in, like, for many, many years. But now the income inequality is very visible, right? And that leads to challenges that if left unaddressed, it's going to get only worse, right? So we've got to kind of go figure out how to make that work. And
Yeah.
I think it's something that the technology
And
industry can do a lot
it's
more.
visible actually.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
is things have changed. Yeah. It really you get an example of the richer getting richer, the poorer getting poorer.
yeah,
This is a clear,
exactly.
and
Yeah,
this is something that needs to be fixed somehow. Needs to be reversed.
yeah,
So I have a couple of more practical questions. Like our audience, let's say our audiences are businesses or people working in government, or in healthcare and education. Now, very simple question. So I have a few questions here that are more practical. Like,
yeah.
how do you implement AI? What kind of advice would you have for our listeners and viewers in that area? So first question would be, um, given the framework you said, let's say I am working in healthcare. I am a company in healthcare. I wanna implement my own AI to help me somehow, to help my partners, my patients, whatever. What would you advise them to do in terms of open source versus closed source
Yeah,
models,
yeah.
for example?
Look, I would basically, ask most companies to actually start with the responsible AI framework that I just talked about, right? It's just
Mm-hmm.
what does AI mean to them, right? It's something for Srini to come say like, hey, here's what we do at Rackspace, but I think it's extremely important that, whether it's a local government or a healthcare organization, kind of establish what responsible AI means for them, right? The framework I gave you
Mm-hmm.
gives you a good way to kind of define what that is, because I think that is the number one thing that they can do, because then that starts to guide decisions that they make. Because I
Okay.
think if you don't establish what AI means to you, then having a conversation around open versus closed source is without context, right? So then it
Right.
becomes a pure technology discussion. I know if
No,
I
but
am,
that's good. That's good
yeah,
because there's no right answer, right? It
there's
depends
no right
on.
answer, right? Like, I think responsibly. So for some companies, it makes sense, right? Like, because like I've actually built it. For others, they may say like, no, I don't want to use this piece because it violates our people. So we talked about it briefly. If I'm in the news media today, or one of the large news, producing companies,
Right.
there are some of the folks that are suing, like the OpenAI guys and other types of things. They're also like, or if I'm in the movie industry and I'm writing scripts, right? There are people who are kind of worried that their intellectual property, and that's very valuable, right? Like, so if I am one of those organizations, and if I'm one of these media conglomerates that's driving it, their responsible AI framework could be, I don't want to do anything with the closed source model because it's going to help me do that, right? So it may
Mm-hmm.
make sense for them to be able to say, like,
Right.
I want to do it because of my definition of responsible AI. I want to stick with the open source model.
Right.
Versus somebody else may look at it and go like, look, I can benefit from that piece, but I can then take it and tailor it so that my implementation of AI is going to be responsible based on my values. So I can
Right.
do that. For me, then closed source could be fine, right? And it doesn't. So I think a lot of people kind of go through the standard technology questions, Paulo,
Mm-hmm.
like, do I buy versus build? Do I do open source versus closed source or something like that? And my thing is, those are all important questions, but they're not the first thing you ask with AI. You understand what responsible AI means to
Right.
you, and then you figure out whether you buy versus build, whether you do open source versus closed
Okay.
source, and
So
all those other questions.
okay. So you talked about I use closed source or open source depending on
Yeah.
whether I trust a certain company that makes one of those models available, closed source available, whether I share the values with them,
Mhm.
whether I care
Yep.
if my data or my patients or my customers' data
Yep.
goes to them, to the cloud, to their cloud, because these closed models are hosted in the cloud, right? They are not, there's no other option. And so there's no really right and wrong answer, right? That's what I take from your
Yeah,
answer.
there's
So
it's all shades of gray, because even if it's a
yeah,
closed source model that's hosted in the cloud, right? I can protect it in such a way that my data does not train the model. That's what Google will tell you. Like, when you build things
Right.
using
Or
text AI,
Microsoft, or
yeah, Microsoft, everyone, like, and I do think that they're absolutely correct, right? Like, you can build it that way. The real question is, like, I think it all ties together. This is where the buy versus build also comes in. A lot of
Yeah.
people, again, I don't know if that was one of your questions, but a lot of people come back and say, Srini, do I buy something or do I build it? Right.
Right.
Again,
Buy versus
trying to
build.
this whole responsible AI construct, right? There's no right answer, but at the same time, well, I'm sorry, there's no wrong answer, but there's a right answer based on your definition of responsible
Right.
AI. Right. And
So,
so let's take Copilot as an example, Microsoft Office 365 Copilot. Um, have we rolled it out to everyone? No, we haven't, right? But have we rolled it out within Rackspace? Absolutely, we have, right? What we've done is, like, so for example, the way we've got it implemented for our legal team, the ability to take transcription of messages, to kind of store that data in our own thing, to protect it in such a way that the data that we are storing is not used to train the outside OpenAI model. All of that, we could ensure it, so we rolled it out to them. Versus if I gave it to like a marketing person that's actually creating our next set of brochures and others, can we actually protect the data and keep it within our pieces? So for us, our definition of responsible AI then drives whether I buy versus build the solution for that as well.
okay. So what you just said also applies to, should I go to the cloud? Should I host it myself? A
Yeah.
public cloud, private cloud, on
I
premise?
I do think that the public-private cloud discussion is going to get more and more relevant in this thing, right? So first of all, I think there's a lot of benefits to air gapping AI, right? Air gapping AI meaning if I have my own data and I can train my enterprise inference on it, and it's only me and my stakeholders that use it, we can drive that. Building air gapped AI is possible both on public and private cloud. The advantage on private cloud versus so let's start with the advantage on public cloud. The advantage on public cloud is the investments that the large cloud service providers are making. It's just phenomenal, right? Like, and the level of innovation and what's coming out,
Right.
speed at which you could do it, they're going to keep driving that. The advantage on the private cloud is, instead of carving out a single tenant version in a multi-tenant infrastructure, I can kind of fine tune my infrastructure just for my purposes, right? And for many of these enterprise instances, that may make more sense, right? Because I'm not trying to solve it. It all comes back to this: can I actually build something that is workload aware, and I can build that? And I do believe that what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot more enterprise inferences looking for private cloud options to be able to host them and drive that.
Okay. I agree. I agree. And this is also linked to the topic of sustainability.
Yeah.
You said before, yeah, why can't I not just give ChatGPT to everybody? Right.
Yeah.
Well, I could, but I'm basically giving a Swiss Army knife, but it's not just a Swiss Army knife. It's a Swiss Army knife. It's a huge language model, and it consumes an incredible amount of resources. OpenAI, for example, and also the Microsoft OpenAI offering and all that, we know that is not, at least it's my understanding, it's not sustainable right now. It's not even economically viable the way they are running it.
Yeah.
So at some point, the technology will have to catch up to make it more viable, economically viable. But also, on the other hand, you probably don't need a 500 billion parameter model to help a legal expert do their job. Maybe a legal expert, for a legal expert to an application that helps a legal expert, maybe a 10 billion parameter model would be just fine.
Exactly.
And you don't need like these oversight models that know everything about the world to help people do, sometimes solve one particular problem, help them at one particular task or one particular type of job. And this should be, I agree, the tendency, right? Because right now it doesn't seem that it's sustainable. Also, the lack of hardware. What is your take on that? How
Well,
how
I saw,
sustainable is generative
Our
AI
our
now,
current
and
model,
how much can it be actually?
yeah, our current model is not sustainable. Let me
Yeah,
put it that way. It's not
yeah,
economically or environmentally sustainable.
yeah.
But again, that may be controversial to say as a head of AI, but I'll say absolutely it is. It's not sustainable. I just like it was interesting because yesterday, Sunday, like I watched Fareed Zakaria on CNN, right? And he
Hmm.
had a data point up there saying they on a single day, the queries that are handled by ChatGPT, the power that's used to do that could power 30 to 40,000 US homes. US homes, right? US is the highest consumer,
Right.
US homes are the highest consumers of energy, 30 to 40,000, right? For what purpose? Most people are not using it to cure cancer, right? Most people are not using it for anything, but they're using it for writing a blog post or, creating these images that I'm talking about.
Right.
I think that piece that you take that, and I was in Davos at the start of this year, and I heard Sam Altman, the CEO of the same, basically, he said he
Hmm.
pointed out this problem. He said it's not sustainable. We're going to have to go look for alternative ways to generate cleaner energy, and at the same time, look for more efficient chips to more efficient hardware to run it. So a lot of the leaders are admitting that, whether they're saying it in those words or not, like, what we've got right now is not economically
Right.
sustainable or environmentally.
And
But
some
yeah,
leaders even claim that, and some leaders even claim that the very approach of large language models is this kind
yeah,
of approach,
yeah,
which is a brute force approach to AI, sort of
yeah,
sorts. It's just you use one single transformer architecture, you feed it a lot of data and hope that it learns everything.
yeah,
That this is also not, this approach, the approach itself needs to change in order to make AI more sustainable,
yeah,
because otherwise
yeah.
it's just more data, more resources, and that just doesn't scale, does it?
Yeah. And that it's again like the whole discussion around large language model versus small language model versus
Yeah.
this, what I believe that all of those discussions are very valid discussions, but it's also a sign of an industry that's maturing very quickly, right?
Yeah.
It's maturing very quickly. If I think about internet, and if I think about client server before that and others during my career, that it took time to develop, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years
Right.
before they mature. This is happening right in front of our eyes in a matter of months, right? So while it may look very noisy on the outside, there's a lot of innovation happening on creating the next generation of chips, right? Next generation of hardware, the next generation of algorithms that move beyond. Until you got to the transformer architecture, you didn't realize like there was that transformer architecture brought us to this age of generative AI. But
Right.
now people are looking at it saying, okay, is there a different model for me to be able to
Right.
train
Is
these
there a
things
better
on?
way than a brute force
Yeah.
approach?
So
Yeah.
I am one of those optimists who believes that that's all headed in the right direction. But today, what you've got is, unless if you get too much caught up into what's going on every day, right? Like I think this is important, where like we as human beings have to take a step back and see where's this headed, and so that we're creating solutions for organizations that are very I know I'm overusing the word, but sustainable on a long-term basis, right?
Hmm.
Because sustainable is important, right? It's at the core of like whether we're going to have this discussion 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
Right.
What we're using today has to be sustainable for us to get to that 10 years, that future in 10 years.
Sure. I mean, I agree. The transformer architecture has brought us here where we are now. It's actually surprising how well it works, right?
Yeah,
Because if you look at it, if you open the hood and look at it, it is a brute force approach, and it's not very fancy. It just works at a very large scale. If you feed it with a lot of data, it will learn. It will learn the data, and it learns language. It learns concepts. It's very surprising what it's doing. But we know now that that's not going to be the future architecture. We know it probably will be there, but will not solve all problems. And I see that that's also something that we have to go through, sort of, in order to learn, we as humanity in general, in order to learn how to do it better in the future.
yeah,
Because I mean, the
yeah,
first, I don't know, the first steam engine was not very efficient either, was it?
Yeah.
So, and this is going to happen much faster. I agree with you
Yeah.
too. So a final question, Srini. What advice would you give to organizations? I mean, you've mentioned the framework and that they
Yeah.
beyond that, beyond the framework that you use, what advice would you give to organizations, given
Yeah.
your experience, in
Yeah.
order that should they do in order to adopt AI, or what mistakes should they avoid?
Yeah. I think the number one the piece of advice that I tell CIOs and other C-level execs who I talk to is spend as much time training your people as much as you're training AI, right?
Okay.
Even more, because it's we've
So
given,
training them to use AI, how to use AI, right? That's what
training
you're
them not just how to use AI, but how they can get the best out of AI, right?
right.
If I am um, like I think what's going on right now is if you take a step back and look at it, 30 years ago, automation
Mm-hmm.
did a lot of things that blue collar workers were doing. The repeatable tasks, can I do that using robotics and automation? That's how Germany, like with their amazing automation and others, they've been able to kind of do that. But I use Germany as an example, not just because you're there, but they also figured out a way to do it symbiotically, right? The automation and the industries that they built over a period of time
Mm-hmm.
actually coexisted with a very heavily trained engineering based workforce, right?
Right.
That's there. And that's why you have German cars, German engineering people talk about those things because I think they did it smartly. If we
A lot of
don't
investment in education.
Yeah, if we don't do that with AI, what's going to happen is AI is going to take over. What happened with blue collar jobs is happening with white collar jobs right now,
Yes.
right? It's basically happening with white collar jobs right now. The U.S. and the other countries have been built on a services economy. White collar jobs, right, is what it's been built on. And
Yeah.
now AI is actually looking at that space and do what it was doing in that space. So I don't think you resist it. I keep using Germany in the automotive industry as an example. They've built and they continue to build great cars, right, and get great automotive,
Mm-hmm.
but they kind of invested in the workforce. We're going to have to do that because if our workforce is heavily geared towards white collar jobs and services economy and others, and AI is going to disrupt that,
Right.
if we don't take the time to kind of bring our people along, um,
There will be a
the
problem.
consequences are not going to be good.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to spend the time bringing our teams, our leaders, and everybody along because this is happening at a pace where at least I believe that we don't have 10 years and 15 years to fix it. We've got to be able to do this very, very quickly. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can take advantage of what's coming with AI, right? So I think that's my number one piece of advice. We've already covered responsible AI and other parts,
What
but I would say take the time, and it
take the
applies to
time
everyone.
to train
Yeah,
your people
yeah.
as much as you take. So what mistakes should then people avoid?
Well, I think we've covered many of those already,
Yeah.
right? I do think that making sure that we do this so that the benefits don't just benefit the top 10%, right? Look, I've been lucky in my career that I am part of that top 10%, right? Like, but I'm basically saying if we keep doing that as we go through this age, it's not going to be. I've been in this industry for 38 years. I've seen so many disruptions. I've seen the world evolve to where it is today. Um, we can't keep taking the same path for the next 30 years. If we take the same path, not many good things happen. So I do think that it's important that leaders actually pay attention to it. And this is, by the way, I'm not saying this is good and that's bad. Capitalism is good and this is bad or any of that stuff. This is not a political statement. This is a human statement,
Yeah.
right? I think it's important that we take advantage of this
But
amazing tech the right way.
doing AI for good, in
Yeah,
other
yeah,
words. Yeah. I agree, and I see the risk as well,
yeah,
of AI being yet another um, uh, fueling even more inequality than
Yeah.
what we already have now. And it's our job in the industry to contribute so that that doesn't happen, right? It's not going to be an easy one because it's happening so fast. But I think that if we focus on applications of AI that are accessible to everybody, that do good, that they're not about generating kitty pictures and things like that.
Yeah.
It's about using AI for something useful and to make things more accessible, like healthcare and education to everybody. That we are heading in the right direction.
Yeah, we covered three of the most important areas where we can use it: healthcare, education, and government services, right? And you don't
Yes,
hear too many
and
people talk about that stuff. And I think those three are very important for us to do, because that's about the future of this thing. We like, look, we could have spent the same amount of time talking about retail. How do I sell more, right? And there are good examples of use there as well. And you
there's
can,
enough attention. There's
yeah, we
enough
need,
people working on that.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm right with you. I think we are in sync here. I agree, and that's why I also mentioned government, because I think government is under-resourced, and that governments it's there to help populations, people, and government can be made better with AI. I completely agree. Thank you, Srini, for the interesting discussions. I feel that we could talk for hours. Unfortunately, we don't have unlimited time. Thank you for joining us on our Real AI Now podcast. For our viewers, if you are watching, don't forget to subscribe our channel on YouTube and give us a like on this video. You can also listen to the episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. The links are in the video description below. Goodbye and see you soon.
thanks, Paulo.